Chaim. So, in the city of Navardik, there was a group of Jews, a group of guys who, they like to, they enjoy the good life. They like to spend their time partying and having a good time. They didn't want to spend their time praying and learning. That wasn't their thing. And they would spend all their time partying. One day, they would, of course, drink a lot, get drunk all the time, and indulge in all their pleasures. And one day, one of the members of the group, they're all sitting together, having a big party and drinking together, and one of them turns to his friends and he says, guys, we're only on this world for a certain period of time. Eventually, we're going to have to go upstairs, and we're going to have to face the heavenly courts. We're going to have to give a din v'cheshbon. We're going to have to give a reckoning of all of our actions. What are we going to do? We're going to come up and we're going to say we spent our life partying. Who knows what's going to happen to us? It's scary. So his friends tell him, don't worry, it's not a big deal. I'm sure we'll figure something out up there. And he says, no, I'm nervous. A couple of his friends also start getting a little nervous. So they decide you have to do something about it. They have to figure out is it serious or not? Is this, they know that there's this heavenly court that everybody faces after 120 years, but they don't know how serious it is. So how are they going to find out? So they decided they're going to make a deal, right? They're going to make a deal. They have a large group of guys who party together. The first one of them, who will pass away and will go up to heaven, so he's going to face the heavenly court. So after he faces the heavenly court, he's going to come back down, reveal himself to his friends, and tell them what it's all about, what happened to him over there. So how is a good question. It's a very hard thing to do, right? So they decided they're going to make a pact. They're going to make a promise together. And so the Shama has to keep its promise, right? Especially if he goes up to heaven. So they're going to make a pact. They all shook hands. They made a promise together that the first one to leave this world is going to come back down and is going to tell everybody exactly what happened to him in the world to come, and is going to tell them if it's something to be worried about or not. So, a short while later, Yossel, one of the biggest drinkers in the group, came down with cirrhosis. It's a kidney disease that comes from excessive alcohol consumption, and he passed away, right? And his friends are all waiting for him. He's going to come back and tell us what's going on upstairs, right? A few days go by, and they're sitting and partying, and suddenly they're surprised. There he is. Here's Yossel. He came back from the world of truth. Here he is. They take one look at him, and they see he's black. His face looks like it was burnt from the fires of Gehenna. And they start getting very nervous. They're like, uh-oh, this seems like big trouble. And they're like, Yossel, what happened to you? Right? What's going to happen to us? Right? So Yossel tells them, don't worry, guys. It's fine. It's okay. You can continue partying. There's nothing to worry about when you come upstairs. They're like, really? And he says, yeah. There's just one thing you have to change. You got to stop drinking vodka. You got to stop drinking vodka. You want to drink wine? That's fine. You want to drink liquor? It's great. You want to drink whiskey, arak, whatever, beer? It's all good. But vodka you got to avoid at all costs. They're like, why? What's wrong with vodka? And he says, I'll tell you what happened to me. See, I came up to the heavenly court. My soul came up before the angels over there, and they took one look at my life, and they said, Yossel, why did you waste your time partying? Why didn't you spend a little time learning, davening? And I told them, because it's not fun to learn and daven. It's boring. Partying is fun. Why should I waste my time learning and davening? And they said, yes, Yossel, but you knew better than that. When you were a young kid, your parents sent you to school, and you knew what your obligation in life is. And not only that, you knew that one day you're going to come up here, and you're going to have to face the heavenly courts, and you're going to have to give an accounting of all your actions. And if you spend your life partying, you're going to suffer for it over here. So you knew about that. So why did you waste your life partying? So I turned to the heavenly court, and I said, listen, guys, you can't blame me. It's not my fault. That's the way Hashem made me. Hashem gave me the nature that I'm a type of person who lives in the present. I live in the moment. I don't think about the future. I was a drunk, right? What does a drunk do? A drunk thinks about right now, right? That was my nature. I couldn't go against my nature, right? So you expect me to start thinking about Olam Haba, about the future reward, about the heavenly court. I think about what's good for me right now, and that's how I lived my life. You can't blame me. That's the way God made me. So the judges looked at me and they said, that's an interesting argument. Maybe you could tell me how you spent your life. Maybe you could tell me how you spent your life. So I told him, I spent all my time partying and drinking. So they told me, what did you drink? So I said, I drink a lot of wine. What types of wine? I drink white wine, red wine, sweet, dry wine. Wine. Such good. You guys should try wine sometime. It's amazing. I told the judges in the heavenly court. He said, no, besides for wine, what else did you drink? So I told him, I drank liquor, I drank beer, I drank arak, I drank whiskey, I drank vodka. So they looked at me and they said, liquor, wine we can understand. Wine tastes good. It's very enjoyable to drink wine. Right? A good fruity flavor. Liquor is sweet. It's enjoyable. Right? Arak has a good licorice flavor, right? It's good taste. Right? Even whiskey has a strong, smoky flavor you can enjoy. But vodka has no taste. It's just bitter. Why would you drink something bitter? You told us that you're the type of guy who lives in the moment and enjoys life. Why would you drink something bitter? So I looked at them and I said, you guys don't know. You guys know nothing about drinking alcohol, right? Of course, when you're drinking it, at the moment that you're drinking it, it's bitter. But as soon as it goes down, it warms you up from the inside. It's such an amazing feeling. You guys got to try it, I told them. They told me, so you're not a guy who just lived in the moment. You were able to think ahead into the future. You were willing to drink down the bitter vodka because you knew that in a short time it'll warm you up. So if you're somebody who's able to plan for the future, right, then you should think a little further ahead, not just a few minutes into the future. You could think a few years into the future also, and you should have, planned for this day when you're standing here in front of the heavenly court, and the judges stood up and they threw the book at me and they sent me right down to the fire. So now, my friends, says Yossel, you guys can continue partying as much as you want. You can drink wine, beer, whiskey, just don't drink the vodka. That's what he told me. So Rabbi Yankel Galinsky says over this mashal, and he says that Yossel was a fool, right? The problem wasn't the vodka. It wasn't the vodka that was the problem. The problem was the hypocrisy, right? The problem was that when he wanted to plan for the future, when it came to his drinking, he was able to plan for the future. But when it came to his neshama, he didn't plan for the future. So it's nothing wrong with drinking vodka. We could drink vodka, right? But when we drink vodka and we think about the good feeling that's going to come later, we can also use that to think for our own future, for the future of our neshama, right? And we could think that there might be something bitter in our life that's eventually going to bring us great joy, and is going to bring holiness into our life. So we learn in this week's parsha that Yosef's brothers are standing before him, and Yehuda gets up and he says, Yosef, you can't take Binyamin as a slave, right? Our father is still connected to Binyamin. If you take Binyamin, our father is not going to be able to live without him. And at that point, Yosef cannot control himself any longer. And he gets up and he says, Ani Yosef ha'oid avichai. I am Yosef. Is my father still alive? Right? And of course, the most famous question on this pasuk is, what's Yosef asking them? Is my father still alive? They just spent the last hour arguing with him and telling him that he has to let Binyamin go because Yaakov cannot live without him. So what's he saying is Yaakov still alive? And it's not just now that they told this to him. They told it to him before also. Right? When he first came down to Egypt, Yosef asked him, how's your father doing? And he said, he's doing well. So what's Yosef suddenly asking him, my father's still alive? And there are many, many different answers that are given. We're not going to discuss all the answers. We're going to discuss one particular answer. So, that's our first question. Right? The second question is, right, the brothers, it says that when Yosef asked this question, his brothers were quiet. They were embarrassed. They didn't answer. And the Medrash comes along, and the Medrash tells us, Rabbi Abba Koyin Bardla says, Oy lanu liyoyim hadin, oy lanu liyoyim hatechacha. Woe unto us for the day of judgment. Woe unto us for the day of rebuke. Right? If Yosef's brothers, who were confronted by their younger brother who had one question for them, and they became so embarrassed they couldn't answer the question. Can you imagine when Hashem comes to us on the day of judgment and He has a whole list of questions for us? Can you imagine how embarrassed we're going to be? And this is a very strange medrash. Right? It's a medrash rabbah, but very strange medrash. What's the connection? Yosef's brother sold him as a slave, right? And Yosef was saying, why did you sell me as a slave? Right? Yosef didn't tell his brothers, why did you commit sins? He said, why did you sell me as a slave? What's the connection to Hashem who's going to come and ask us, why did we do sins? Like, how are the two related? So, the Sadiger Rebbe, Avram Yaakov Friedman, once gave somebody money to buy something for him. He once asked somebody to buy something for him, and it was an item that cost 25 shekels. And he gave him the money, he gave him 25 shekels. The guy takes the money and he starts counting it. And he counts, and he sees, he trusted the Rebbe, but he wanted to make sure he got the money that he needs to buy the stuff. He counts it up, and he sees it's 26 shekels. So he runs back to the Rebbe, and he says, Rebbe, you gave me an extra shekel. And I was like, it's fine. So he says, Rebbe, you gave me money to buy something, right? You should give me the right amount of money, right? So the Rebbe says, it's okay, it's fine. Keep the extra money. And he says, Rebbe, I don't understand what's going on over here. So the Rebbe says, I'll explain it to you. Right? The Poskim saying, it's brought down in Mishnah Berurah, in Siman Nun Aleph, that when a person davens, he has to be very, very careful about every single word that he reads. Well, first of all, there's the Parshas also, but just reading the words. Make sure you read every word. Don't swallow words. And the way that our Chachamim say this thing, they say that when you say every word, you shouldn't skip over words. Just like when you're counting your money, you don't skip over bills, right? You make sure you get every single bill, right? So too, when it comes to your davening, you got to make sure that you get every single word in davening. So the Rebbe says, listen, I do my best. I try to be very careful with my davening, but I'm worried that maybe my davening isn't as careful. I'm not as careful with my words of davening as I am when counting my money. So I decided I'm going to be a little less careful when counting my money. Right? It's okay. Extra bill slips by. That way, at least I'm more careful with my davening than when counting my money. So, when first hearing the story, it sounds like it's a bit of a game, right? He's going to be less careful with money, so he could be less careful in davening. What's the connection, really? But the truth is, he's telling us something much deeper, right? The Tanat Eliyahu says that Eliyahu Hanavi was once traveling, and he met a Jew who never studied Torah in his life. And Eliyahu Hanavi turns to this Jew, and he says to him, aren't you worried about the day of judgment? Right? One day your neshama is going to have to go upstairs, and it's going to go before the heavenly court. And you never learned, you never davened. What are you going to say? You never studied Torah. I guess you did daven, but you never studied Torah. So he says, I'm not worried about the day of judgment. Eliyahu Hanavi says, why not? So he says, because I'm not a very smart person. Hashem didn't give me a very good head. So when I come in front of the heavenly court, they're going to ask me, why didn't I study Torah? I'm going to have a very good answer. I'm going to tell them, I don't have a good head. I can't study. So Eliyahu Hanavi says, okay, that's interesting. So what do you do for a living? He says, I'm a fisherman. He says, oh, you're a fisherman. How do you catch fish? So he says, well, I'm going to explain to you. You have to go in this river. The fish swim in this pattern. There's a current in this direction, and the fish go traveling down the current. And you have to put a net. And he says, you know all about the currents. The net. Where do you get the net from? Oh, I make the net on my own. I take strings, I spin it, and I go through the whole process to make a net. And you got to know how to make a net. You got to braid it the right way. If you braid it incorrectly, it's going to fall apart. You got to make sure it's braided the right way. You have to make sure it's going. You put the net in the direction that the current is flowing, so that the fish should go in. So Eliyahu Hanavi says, wow, you're a genius. How do you know all this stuff? So he says, well, when it comes to business, I'm able to figure it out. When it comes to my job, I figure out what makes me the most money. So Eliyahu Hanavi says, if when you're going to come up to the court and you're going to say you don't have enough seichel for Torah, they're going to tell you when it came to your business, when it came to your job, you were able to figure things out. When it comes to Torah, you should have also figured it out. Right? And this is what the Rebbe was saying. The Rebbe was saying that when we come up, when we have to give a reckoning of our actions, we're going to have lots of excuses for everything we do. But the question is, are our excuses consistent? Right? If we say that we're not able to learn so much Torah, that we don't have so much time to do chesed, they're going to look at us and they're going to say, yeah, but you had so much time to browse on your phone, right? To watch movies. So why didn't you have time to learn? Why didn't you have time to help people? Right? It's not, the excuse itself might be a good excuse, but the problem is the inconsistencies, the hypocrisy. It was Yom Kippur at night, and the entire congregation in Berdichev was sitting, and it was in Shul, and they were getting ready for Kol Nidre, for the prayer of Kol Nidre to start. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was at the Amud, and he was just standing there. He didn't start the prayers. And people started looking at him. His face was covered with a talus. Someone peeked under the talus. They saw his face was red, and it looked like his soul had ascended to the upper worlds. And all the Hasidim and Shul started to get nervous, right? They knew that if it's right before Yom Kippur, and the Rebbe is not beginning the prayers, there must be a serious problem upstairs, right? There must be a serious kitrug. And they all started to pray with more kavanah. They all took out the Tehillim as they started reading the Tehillim. They're not sure what's going on. What is the Rebbe so worried about? What's happening? And the Rebbe is standing there, and suddenly, I believe Yitzchak turns around, takes his talos off his head, and he calls out, "Is there anyone in Shul from the city of Pilava?" It's quiet. It's quiet. "I need a Jew from the city of Pilava. Is there somebody here?" It's quiet. He says it a third time, and finally, from the back of the shul, a guy starts walking up, and I believe Yitzchak says to him, "Are you from the city of Pilava?" And he says, "No, well, I have a farm in the village of Ranvitz, which is right outside of Pilava, but I go there all the time, so I'm familiar with the city." So he says, so if you go there all the time, you must certainly know Baron Shatrinsky, the ruler of the city. Of course, I'm not friends with him, but I know who he is, right? So he says, "Well, maybe if you know him, you probably heard about his big dog. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about his dog." Right? So the guy goes, "His dog? Oh, that's an interesting. Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit. He had a few months ago. The Baron traveled to one of his gambling trips to Frankfurt, and he noticed this unique, special breed of dog. And the Baron decided he needs to get this dog. It was very well trained. It was trained, in the most elite, dog training school at the time. Trained somewhere in Paris. And the Baron inquired about the dog, and he was told that it cost 2,000 rubles. But for the Baron, for me, that's a lot of money. But for the Baron, that's not a lot of money. He pulls out 2,000 rubles. He gets the dog. He comes home. He orders some servants to get together and build a beautiful, fancy dog house, a little palace for his dog, right? They get the best wood, and they build a little bit, even dig in the ground, make a little foundation for this little dog house. They build a little palace for this dog. It cost him another 250 rubles to build this little house, this little dog house. Then he ordered his workers to build a special wagon for his dog. So whenever he travels, his fancy carriage, he should have a little dog carriage going alongside with him, and they built this expensive carriage, another few hundred rubles. Now, of course, he had to hire a whole team of servants to cater to the dog's every whim, right? To take care of the dog at all times. The dog would only eat the finest, the best steaks served to him on golden platters, right? This was the most spoiled dog in the world. Very interesting, says Rabbi Yitzchak. And what happened to the dog? Well, Nebuch, the dog's now wandering around the city. It doesn't have a place to stay. What happened? So he says, well, one day the dog the dog was eating. The Baron came to feed the dog, and the dog was trained that when you bring it food, it waits till you put the food down and then it eats it. But apparently the dog was very hungry that day, and the dog yanked the food out of the Baron's hand. The Baron was furious. He said, "Get rid of the dog, throw it out into the streets." And for the past few months, it's just been wandering around town. Some people, I guess they feel bad. They feed it they give it some food. So Levi Yitzchak, his face lights up. He's so happy. A big smile lights up his face. And he looks up. He turns around. He looks towards the Aron HaKodesh. And he says, "Do you hear that? You hear that, Malach Michael? The Duke is not compassionate. He just likes to throw. He just has too much money. He doesn't know what to do with it. He throws away $3,000, 3,000 rubles on this dog that he got rid of after a month. It's no real compassion over it. And then he puts his talus over his head and he starts calling it. Everyone is shoeless. No idea what's going on, what's happening over here. And they know they of course they know not to interrupt their Rebbe during the Kippur services, so they wait till after the fast. After the fast, the next night they're having a little meal, a breakfast meal. And one of the Chassidim says, "Rebbe, can you tell us what was going on with the Baron's dog?" And he says, "Yeah, I'll tell you. You see, in the city of Mechov near Krakow, there lived a poor Jew. And this poor Jew, he was poor all of his life. He barely had enough money to get food for his family, but he survived, and he never complained, and he never asked people for help. He never asked for tzedakah. But recently, his daughter reached marriageable age, and he made a shidduch with a fine young man. However, they needed money to make the wedding. He didn't have any money, and it was getting closer to the time of the wedding. And the chassan's father says, if you can't get the money together in time, we're going to have to break off the shidduch. This poor man doesn't know what to do. Right? He doesn't have any money, and he realized he has no choice. He has to go around, and he has to collect tzedakah. Right? He's never done this in his life. So he starts wandering around to the nearby towns, and he wasn't the type of guy. There are some people who are good schnorrers, right? They're very good at going up to people and asking them for money. This guy wasn't that type, right? He would approach somebody, excuse me, man, maybe you can get, nobody looked at him. Nobody gave him a second look, right? Maybe a few people gave him a couple of pennies. But he wasn't very successful in his fundraising. And he's traveling around, and he spent a month traveling around. It's getting closer to the time of the wedding, and he still doesn't have any money, right? Finally, a week before Rosh Hashanah, he comes to the town of Pilava. And over there, the Gabbai in the city of Pilava was an old friend of his, and he figured maybe the Gabbai can help me out, he can help me raise the funds. But it happened to be that at the time that he arrived in town, the Jews in Pilava were fundraising for building a mikveh. And the Gabbai was busy fundraising for a different cause, so he wasn't really able to help him. So, he arranged a little bit of money, but it wasn't what this man needed. And now, this was his last hope, right? This good friend might be able to help him out. And now his friend's not able to help him. So what does he do? He goes out of the city and he starts crying. He's walking down the road, right? He knows that in another few weeks he has to make a wedding. He doesn't have any money. And the other side's going to break off the wedding, chas v'shalom. So he sits down on the side of the road. He sits down on a rock and he starts to cry. As he's sitting there on the rock, right, the fancy carriage rolls by. It's Baron Shatrinsky. And the Baron looks on the side of the road. He sees this Jew sitting there and crying. So he says, "Hey, Jew, what's wrong?" So he starts crying and he tells him, "I'm trying to raise money for my daughter's wedding. I couldn't raise any money." He says, "I don't understand. You didn't go to the Jews of the city and ask them to help you?" He says, "I did, but I wasn't able to make much." So the Baron goes, "Oh, the Jews couldn't help you? The Baron Shatrinsky will help you. How much money do you need?" And he says, "Well, I need another 100 rubles. "No problem," says the Baron. He reaches into his pocket. He pulls out 100 rubles. He says, "Here, dobre mazel tov," right? And he continues on his way. Now, of course, this Jew was very happy. Now has enough money to marry off his daughter. But there's somebody else who was very happy. The Sultan was very happy. He had his argument now, right? So a week before Rosh Hashanah, he's waiting for Yom Kippur, right? And he comes up before the heavenly court, and he's like, "Look at this. This Jew wanders around for a month from one city to the other. He asked thousands of Jews to help him. Not one of them gave him any money. They gave him pennies here, pennies there. The Baron comes along, this goy, and he gives him all the money at once. Right? It's a big problem, a big kitzur. So I was sitting there in Kippur, and Malach Michal, whose job it is to defend the Jewish people, comes to me and he says, "You got big trouble upstairs." Right? So at that point, I'm sitting there and trying to think what we can do, and that's when I decided I have to bring up the Baron's dog, right? And when this Jew came up and he explained that this Baron wasted 3,000 rubles on the dog that he threw away a month later, I turned to the heavenly court and I said, "This Duke isn't compassionate, right? He just has so much money, he doesn't know what to do with it, right? He could waste 3,000 rubles on a dog, so yes, which he gets rid of after a month. So spending 100 rubles on this Jew is nothing, right? The poor Jews who gave him a penny each, that penny was the bread that they were supposed to eat that day, right? So yes, somebody might give 100 rubles to tzedakah, but if you're going to spend 3,000 rubles, right, on either a gambling trip, right, or on a dog that you're going to get rid of after a month, so that tzedakah isn't really, that tzedakah isn't worth very much, right? And this is really the argument that's going to be brought to each and every one of us when we come upstairs, right? We're going to come up to Shamayim, we're going to say Hashem, we try to learn, right? But we weren't able to. We didn't have enough. We didn't have a good enough head to learn. We try to give tzedakah. We didn't have enough money. Hashem's going to say, you didn't have a good head. Let's take a look at your business acumen, right? Did you have a good head for business? Suddenly, when it came to business, you're able to figure everything out. You're able to figure out the stock market, but you're not able to figure out a piece of chumash.
No, I have an answer.
What?
Street smart and book smart.
But the question is, in your business is also a bit of book smart, right? And the truth is,
I have an accountant for that.
What?
I have an accountant for that.
So there is an accountant, but you were able to figure out when it came time to invest in the stock market, you suddenly had all the charts and you were looking at all the charts, but you're not able to look at the charts in the chumash. That you're not able to look at, right? And then when it came time to, you're going to say, I didn't have money to give to tzedakah, right? What's Hashem going to say? Hashem is going to say, you didn't have money to give to tzedakah. Okay, what about the vacation you took last year? What about the gambling trip you took? What about the car? Because every 3 years you got to get a new car. It's the inconsistencies, and this is really what was going on with Yosef and his brothers, right? Yosef's brothers had a very good argument, right? What was their argument? When it came time to sell Yosef, they set up a beis din. They set up a court, and they went through the halachas, and they decided that according to Jewish law, Yosef deserves to be sold as a slave, or maybe even worse. Right? They were right. They had proofs. They had proofs from the Torah that Yosef deserved to be sold as a slave. Right? So if someone's going to come to them and say, why did you do such a thing? They're going to say, we were just following the law. So what did Yosef do? So they were. They were a beis din. Right? Not only that, Hashem joined their beis din. They had only 9 people. They asked Hashem to join their beis din. Right?
So what did Hashem do?
Well, Hashem obviously agreed with them. They were right. Legally, they were 100% right. So what did Yosef do? Yosef said, you guys are right. You had a right to sell your brother. Your brother should have legally been sold as a slave. But I can arrange a situation where Binyamin also legally needs to be sold as a slave. Right? Binyamin was found in possession of stolen goods, and legally he has to be sold as a slave too. What are you going to say now? So the brother's like, well, you're right. There was stolen possessions, but our father's sick. You can't punish Binyamin and cause our innocent father to suffer. So Yosef looks at them and he says, I'm Yosef. Is my father still alive? For the past 22 years I've been gone. Why weren't you worried about my father then? Why is it that when it came to me and you were jealous of me and you hated me, suddenly, we got to follow the strict letter of the law and we got to sell him as a slave? When it came to Binyamin, where Yehuda knew that he's going to get in big trouble if Binyamin is taken as a slave, suddenly he's worried about his father. And it was the hypocrisy that the brothers couldn't answer the question. Right? It's not that they didn't have a good answer. They had a great answer. But the answer only worked in one case. In the other situation, the answer wouldn't work. And this is what Rabbi Abba Kohen Bartles is saying. He's saying when we come up to heaven, we're also going to have a whole list of good answers. But they're going to look at us and they're going to say, the answers don't fit. It's inconsistent. Right? Right? When we the plan for our future neshama, that we don't have enough seichel to plan for. But to drink a little vodka, of course, you could drink bitter stuff and plan for the future. Chaim. So to conclude with a story, Rabbi Fishel Schechter is an international speaker. He's a storyteller. You have some of his tapes. My kids have some of his tapes. And he's also a teacher. He teaches in Yeshivas Torah Vodaas in Brooklyn. And he had a boy in his class. We'll call him, for the story, we'll call him Chaim. And Chaim was a boy who, he wasn't that into learning, right? He was more into sports, right? That's what he spent his time involved in sports. And, he obviously had to learn a little bit, but he wasn't that into it. So one day, he's sitting in class, and his Rebbe tells him, can Chaim read the Gemara? So he opens up the Gemara, and he says, Amar Rabba. Rabba says, and the Rebbe says, no, it's not Rabba, it's Rava. You see, in the Talmud, there are two great scholars, two great sages in the Talmud. One of them was named Rabba, and the other one was named Rava. And their names are spelled very similarly, but Rabba ends with a hey, and Rava ends with an aleph. So this boy says, Amar Rabba, and he says, no, it's Rava. Okay, Rava. Continues reading. Yeah, so Rabba says, no, it's not Rabba, it's Rava. Okay, fine, Rava. It's driving me crazy, right? Continues reading. A few times he makes the same mistake. Fine, okay. 2 days later, again, his Rebbe asks him to read the Gemara, and this time he starts off, this time he already knows it's Rava, so he opens up the Gemara and he says, Amar Rava. Rava says, no, this time it's Rabba. And he says, okay, Rabba. Last time it was Rabba, this time it's Rabba, and he starts reading again. Okay, Rabba. No, it's Rabba and Rabba with the Rebbe. Stop driving me crazy. Right? It's Rabba, Rava is switching back and forth. And his Rebbe says, well, there's two different rabbis. There's Rabba and Rava, and you got to keep track of which one is which. And he says, who cares? Rabba and Rava are the same thing. Who cares with Rabba and Rava? Right? What are you driving me crazy? Maybe his Rebbe did give him the hint. So Ari has a good idea. You should remember. Yeah. Excellent. So maybe his Rebbe told him that. His Rebbe said, if you want to remember the difference between Rabba and Rava, you should remember Yehei Shmei Rabba. If there's a hey, then it's Rabba. And he said, Rebbe, I don't care. What difference does it make? Stop driving me crazy. What's between Rabba and a Rava? Rabbi Schechter started to think, how could he teach this boy? He realized that the problem wasn't Rabba and Rava. That wasn't the issue. It's not that he had a problem remembering the Hey Shmei Rabba. That was not the issue. The issue is that he didn't care enough about the Gemara to actually pay attention to the details. So how does he teach him? How does he make this clear to him? Right? So he's thinking. He goes home that night. He's listening to the news, the headlines, and suddenly it hits him. It's an idea. Right? The next morning, next day he comes to school, and for whatever reason, you have to call Chaim in to speak to him for a few minutes. And after he finishes speaking to Chaim, he says, Chaim, did you watch the Knicks game last night? So Chaim says, Rebbe, it's Knicks. And he says, okay, Knicks, fine. So the Knicks did very good last night. They got like 120 points in one game. It was an amazing game for the Knicks. Rebbe, it's Knicks. It's not Knicks, it's Knicks. And he says, okay, fine. Knicks, what's the difference? Okay. Do you think the Knicks are going to make the playoffs this year? They're having a very good year, those Knicks. And he says, no, Rebbe says it's not, Rebbe, for the fifth time, it's not Knicks. It's a silent K. It's Knicks. And the Rebbe goes, what's the difference, Knicks and Knicks? When it comes to sports, suddenly there's a big difference between Knicks and Knicks. It drives you crazy if I say the wrong name. So maybe when it comes to the Gemara, there's also a difference between a Rabba and a Rava. Right? And this is really the point that we're trying to bring out, right? This is the argument that each and every one of us is going to have to face when we come upstairs, right? They're going to look at us and they're going to say, right? Mincha today was, right, 5:20. 5:25 almost no one was here, right? I didn't say 5 minutes. Who cares? 5 minutes. Okay, when you had an important business meeting with a new business client, right, a multi-million-dollar account, did he also say 5 minutes doesn't matter, right? There's a difference, right? So you have a good excuse. It's just 5 minutes. But the question is, why is 5 minutes important in one situation and not important in another situation? Why is giving, $1,000 to Stuck on a tremendous, big deal for us? But spending $1,000 on a vacation with our family is nothing, right? Why is spending 2 hours? What?
They both take credit cards.
Yeah, and spending 2 hours watching a movie. We have plenty of time for that, right? When it comes to spending 2 hours helping somebody who needs help, suddenly we're so busy we don't have time for it, right? And that's really the question, right? And that's really the lesson we have to learn from this, right? We have to stop and think every time we drink vodka out of our brain. We have to think, you know what? I'm willing to drink a little bit of bitter vodka because I know that in a few minutes it's going to warm me up. So maybe I should be willing to endure a little bit of bitterness in my life for all the holiness and the chayas and the life and the godliness that it's going to bring down on me. L'chaim. Drink the vodka. L'chaim.